Good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Golding. I'm Director General for Net Zero Buildings and Industry at the Department for Business. Really great to be here today for the opportunity to talk to you about the role of the public sector and government in achieving net zero. I want to start by saying a bit about net zero itself as an idea and where it's come from. So it's become so totemic in government policy on climate change that it's easy to forget it's less than 2 years since the UK became the first major economy in the world to set net zero in law. We've seen others follow suit since, but it was a landmark moment for us and it has changed everything. So even though we had a target before that was legally binding, that 80% reduction by 2050, actually moving to net zero has made a huge difference. Decarbonisation was always going to be hard. We knew that action was needing everywhere. What we like to talk about with net zero is it really left us with nowhere to hide. So every sector has to go at full tilt. We need every part of the economy to decarbonise. Everything needs to change. Everything needs to change fast. This morning, I wanted to talk about two aspects of that under the banner of net zero government. So first, about the particular role that the public sector has in decarbonising, both in how we lead the way and in what the public sector can do as a catalyst, as a driving force for action in other sectors. But I also want to talk about the role of government in supporting innovation in partnership with the private sector, which is absolutely critical to reducing costs and smoothing the path to net zero for every single part of the economy. If we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So starting with the public sector and why it matters. It's easy to think of it as small. It's, after all, only responsible for 2% of the country's emissions, but it does have a really unique role in a number of ways, and it can be critical to wider decarbonisation of the economy. So what you can see in front of you is that breakdown of the different sectors, and public sector is absolutely the smallest on this scale, but it matters. So firstly, it matters because of leadership. There's a particular responsibility for those within the public sector to walk the walk. We as government set the targets, we legislate and set the levers to drive action in other parts of the economy. And it's only right that we show the commitment ourselves by taking early action, by demonstrating it can be done, and by really driving forward action. So secondly, as well as leadership directly, we have a role as a catalyst. The public sector might be small as a proportion of total emissions, but actually it's huge in the scale of its operations. We have vast procurement power. Institutions like the military, the NHS are enormous employers with lots and lots of complex buildings, transport fleets and other assets. So we can be a proving ground for the transition to net zero. We can show how it can be done. We can share our learning openly with other sectors. We have no commercial interest in holding on to that learning, and actually it's in our interest to share. So we can be a huge driver, and we know that's worked. So internationally, what we've seen is that where the public sector acts, where it drives energy efficiency, for example, it has been a catalyst for the growth of wider markets and energy services, often in commercial buildings. Thirdly, I think the question for us is, if not us, who? We are the government, we are the public sector. There's no other actor that will step in to decarbonise for us or make us do it. We set the rules, we provide the funding, and it's our responsibility to act. Next slide, please. The chart here gives a sense of the largest emitters and how emissions in the public sector break down. So around half of the total is health and education. But rather than looking at the breakdown, I think the message I want you to take from this slide is just the sheer diversity of the public sector. It's got a wide range of emission sources, of types of building stock, from prisons to schools to hospitals to military accommodation. The public sector is incredibly diverse, and in many ways we can see it as a microcosm of the wider economy. If something's happening somewhere, it's probably happening in some part of the public sector. So that ultimately the skills and the technologies that we need to decarbonise the public sector, that need to decarbonise government, are the same ones we'll need for the broader economy. So once again, the message here is leadership in the public sector can be absolutely key to showing how we can act and where we can act across the whole of the economy. 2% we may be, but we really matter. If we move on. So I'll talk about what we can do to help the public sector. So my experience actually from talking to colleagues right across different parts of government and the wider public sector is genuinely inspiring. There's huge enthusiasm and drive here. I've gone into a number of meetings with bits of the public sector and bits of government thinking I'm going to make the case for change, I'm going to make the pitch as the net zero person in the room, and they're often ahead of me. So The enthusiasm is there. People really want to see this change. And we go straight past the carefully prepared arguments I made on, so that's great, but how do we do it? So I think there are some roles here for government in helping, because the public sector has the enthusiasm, it has the drive, but there are challenges. It's a suite of very, very complex operations and organizations. Decarbonising in the right way needs expertise and funding that not everyone has. So we in government have a role in helping and supporting our colleagues, and that's in three ways. First, by helping to agree and monitor high ambition and clear common standards to need to do. Secondly, providing financial support. Funding is often stretched, as so many people know, for public bodies, and we need to make sure the right supports get there in the right place to make the change happen. And thirdly, there's something about support for skills, capability, and capacity. These are busy organisations, and these are some very specialist skills in some areas about decarbonisation. If we move to the next slide, I'll just say a bit more about each of those themes. So first, standards and monitoring. For central government itself, we set targets through something called the Greening Government Commitments. They're working really well. The current target is that by 2020, we needed to have met an ambition of a 43% cut in ambitions across central government compared to a 2010 baseline. We'd actually overachieved that by April 2019, so it hit 46% cut in emissions. Compared to 2010, that's a huge cut. So we're going to keep using that framework. We will keep raising that ambition over time and hopefully continue to overachieve. For the wider public sector, there's a somewhat different framework. And what we're asking there is that all public bodies set their own ambitious goals that reflect their circumstances, their sector, how they operate. And we ask everyone, we are completely committed to developing help and guidance on how to do that, because it's sometimes complex to make that judgment. And making sure we recognise there are different things appropriate to different organisations, but we all need to be on a path to net zero. How we do that really matters. So there are a wealth of low carbon technologies and ideas out there, and sometimes enthusiasm can take us in interesting directions, but the reality is that some things have a greater impact than others. Some things are more strategically vital to net zero. So for buildings, for example, the biggest impact will come from the action we can take that reduces emissions on site rather than further upstream. So things like installing low carbon heating systems are incredibly valuable. Other changes like solar panels are really positive as well, but we should think hard for any given site about what gives the biggest bang for our buck. And of course, lastly, I just want to note, new buildings are a key opportunity. Now, they're not the biggest challenge in some ways. 90% of the buildings that will be standing in 2050 are standing already. But there are clear wins and low-cost wins from making sure that the buildings we put in place now are net zero ready, so that we don't find ourselves faced with costly retrofits late down the track. Next slide, please. Funding, everyone's favourite topic. Many of you will be familiar with the fantastic work that's done by Salix Finance, who are a long-standing delivery partner of ours and have been delivering the public sector energy efficiency loan scheme for many years now. Salix are also our delivery partner for the public sector decarbonisation scheme. So that's something that was announced by the Chancellor last summer and which we launched with £1 billion of new funding in September 2020. Once again, we see the enthusiasm here. The scheme's proved incredibly popular. We've had over £2 billion applications for that £1 billion scheme. It really shows the drive and enthusiasm that we've got from right across the public sector. It's closed to applications now, and Salix are doing a fantastic job of working their way through all of those on a rolling basis and getting the offers out there. We're seeing it as a really critical part of kickstarting the move to net zero. It doesn't take us all the way there. It shows progress, though, and it's a start on investment against the manifesto commitment the current government had of a £2.9 billion investment in decarbonising. If we move on. So support. I've said this before, but it's worth reiterating. This is really complex, and we recognise it is. The whole sector needs access to the right support, the right skills, and the right expertise to decarbonise well. We want to work to help in a number of ways, and I'm sure we will want to do more. So alongside the decarbonisation scheme that I talked about on the previous slide, we launched a public sector low carbon skills fund. So that was funding to help public sector bodies engage with the right specialist and expert advice, understand and plan the right projects for them to decarbonise the most effective way. That scheme's closed for applications too, and it's also really popular. So I'm confident we'll see great results from that, and it's something we'll be able to build on. Another great example example is the Modern Energy Partners scheme. So that's run as a partnership between government departments and the Energy Systems Catapult. It's something which incidentally has been supported by the innovation funding I'll be talking about in just a moment, and has been looking at how we learn through experience on really, really complex campus scale sites such as prisons and hospitals. And lastly, just a plug for our local energy programme. It's something we run out of BEIS, and where we work directly with local authorities as well as through our 5 local energy hubs to help think about what's the right strategy, what's the right approach for any given local area and set of circumstance, and how do we build that pipeline of investable projects that will help us get to net zero. So that's by no means an exhaustive list, but I wanted to give a flavour of some of the great work that's being done across the public sector and what we in government are seeking to do to help. If we move on to the next slide and onto the topic of innovation. So this is an absolutely fundamental pillar of our net zero strategy, and you can see the impacts that innovation's had over the years. Back when we set the net zero targets, the Committee on Climate Change, the independent advisors to government, talked about the cost of that. And what they found was that the costs of achieving net zero are pretty much the same as it was assumed the cost would be back when we set the 80% target for 2050, way back in 2008. Innovation's done that above anything else. There have been huge, huge falls in the costs of key technologies, so offshore wind, batteries, LED lighting, and more. There's clearly a wealth of routes, funding routes, work on innovation, but I wanted to talk about 2 in particular. The £500 million Energy Innovation Programme, which we run from 2016 to 2021, and the new £1 billion Net Zero Innovation Programme. So if we turn to the next slide, I'll cover the first of those. So the innovation programme, that ran from 2016 to this year. It's now closed to new projects. Many of the projects it was supported are underway now, and they'll continue to deliver over the coming months. It had 6 areas of progress, which are the ones you can see on this slide, and that's how we broke the funding down across different sectors, thinking about what's going to have a strategic impact and where we can help drive down costs. And I'll say a bit more about how this breaks down. If we move on to the next slide, just a couple of examples, if I may. So I won't go into detail of all of the projects. There were some fantastic things done across there, but if we just take a couple here. So Highview Power, which was a 50 megawatt innovative energy storage project, which is being constructed now in Manchester and will be one of Europe's largest energy storage systems. So we funded that from our scheme, but it's also attracted inward investment from the private sector. That's been a model for us throughout the scheme. And the other one I was going to highlight is Tata Chemicals, who are leading the UK's first carbon capture and usage demo in Cheshire. Again, a fantastic project and incredibly important to our strategic approach to decarbonising. Looking to the future, if we look at the next slide. So here, the Prime Minister's 10-point plan towards the end of last year was a landmark moment for us. It set out a lot of the new approach on which we'll build in setting out our strategy for net zero. Part of that, one of the things it announced was our new net zero innovation portfolio and £1 billion of funding to support that. That'll be a successor to the £500 million scheme that I've just talked about. The focus will be very much on demonstrating the kind of innovative technologies we need to deliver net zero. So not just about innovation and brand new things, but about demonstration in the real world, about driving down cost, about testing this in reality. All of this is on top of the other support that's coming from other parts of government. For example, Blue Skies Research, which we fund through university, funds like the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund that will support early deployment in particular sectors. We'll be setting out further details on the challenges and the programmes that will form part of this portfolio over time. Some of those were out just recently, for instance, when the Chancellor set out over £90 million of funding for energy storage, floating offshore wind and bioenergy. And if we turn to the next slide, you can again see some of the examples of things we wanted to focus on. So floating offshore wind we're seeing is a great opportunity. We've got a lot of deep water off the shores of this country, and there are lots of opportunities for us to test out and lead on a new technology, as we've sought to do for offshore wind generally. Energy storage and batteries, incredibly important, but longer duration really matters. So not just the day-to-day storage that can help us balance the grid, that can help people manage storage even at a household scale, but looking at longer term storage and how that can help us with reducing costs increase over time. And of course, bioenergy, we're looking at £4 million into funding sustainable production of domestic biomass. So those are just some examples. And I think that I will stop after this, but I wanted to give that general sense. There is huge enthusiasm here. There is huge drive here. And this is just part of the effort we'll be making on decarbonising the whole economy. I think what's important for me is that while we need to act everywhere, there is a role for the public sector in catalysing change, in leading change, and in creating the transformation we want to see across the whole of the UK and globally as we run up to COP26, a vital year for all of us and a great chance for UK leadership. Thank you very much.